Hello, we are going to be reading Selected Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, Dover Thrift Editions, read by Tina Mickelson. I am a homeschool mom, and this was published in 2017, the specific edition. And we're going to start with the general prologue and probably quit with that. Not that one. There we go. Here begins the book of the Tales of Canterbury. When April, with his showers sweet with fruit, the draught of March has pierced unto the root, and bathed each vein with liquor that has power to generate therein and sire the flower. When Zephyr also has, with his sweet breath, quickened again in every holt and heath, the tender shoots and buds, and the young sun, into the ram, one half his course has run, and many little birds make melody that sleep through all the night with open eye, so nature pricks them on to ramp and rage. Then do folk long to go on pilgrimage, and palmers to go seeking out strange lands, to distant shrines well known in sundry lands, and specially from every shire's end of England, they to Canterbury wend, the holy blessed martyr there to seek who helped them when they lay so ill and weak. Befell that, in that reason, on a day, in Southwark, at the Tabard, as I lay ready to start upon my pilgrimage to Canterbury, full of devout homage, there came at nightfall to that hostelry some 29 in a company of sundry persons who had chanced to fall in fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, that toward Canterbury town would ride. The rooms and stables spacious were and wide, and well we there were eased, and of the best. And briefly, when the sun had gone to rest, so had I spoken with them, every one, that I was of their fellowship anon, and made agreement that we'd early rise to take the road, as you I will apprise. But none the less, whilst I have time and space, before yet farther in this tale I pace, it seems to me accordant with reason to inform you of the state of every one. Of all of these it appeared to me, and who they were, and what was their degree, and even how arrayed there at the inn, and with a knight. Thus will I first begin. So he tells about each person that he meet of the 29, I believe. So here's the knight. A knight there was, and he a worthy man, who from the moment that he first began to ride about the world, loved chivalry, truth, honor, freedom, and all courtesy. Full worthy was he in his liege lord's war, and therein had he ridden none more far, as well in Christendom as heathenesse, and honored everywhere for worthiness. At Alexandria he, when it was won, full oft the table's roster he'd begun, above all nations knights in Prussia. In Latvia rated he, and Russia, no christened man so oft of his degree. In far Granada at the siege was he, of Algeciras, and in Balmarie. At Ayas was he, and at Satellai, when they were won, and on the middle sea, at many a noble meeting chanced to be. Of mortal battles he had fought 15, and he'd fought for our faith at Tramissini 3 times in lists, and each time slain his foe. This self-same worthy knight had been also at one time with the lord of Palatai against another heathen in Turkey, and always won he sovereign fame for prize. Though so illustrious, he was very wise, and bore himself as meekly as a maid. He never yet had any vileness said. In all his life, to whatsoever wight, he was a truly perfect gentle knight. But now to tell you all of his array, his steeds were good, but yet he was not gay. Of simple fustian wore he a jupon. Jupon is a jacket or tunic, sadly discolored by his habergeon, which is a jacket of mail, for he had lately come from his voyage, and now was going on this pilgrimage. So now we have the squire. With him there was his son, a youthful squire, a lover and a lusty bachelor, with locks well curled as if they'd laid in press. Some 20 years of age he was, I guess. In stature he was of an average length, wondrously active, aye, and great of strength. He'd ridden some time with the cavalry in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well within that little space, in hope to win thereby his lady's grace. Prinked, which is primped or adorned, out he was, as if he were a mead, all full of fresh-cut flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. Short was his gown, with sleeves both long and wide. Well could he sit on horse and fairly ride. He could make songs and words thereto indite, joust and dance too, as well as sketch and write. So hot he loved that, while night told her tale, he slept no more than does a nightingale. Courteous he and humble, willing and able, and carved before his father at the table. Now we have the yeoman. A yeoman had he, that is the knight, nor more servants, no, at that time, for he chose to travel so, and he was clad in coat and hood of green. A sheaf of peacock arrows, bright and keen, under his belt he bore right carefully. Well could he keep his tackle yeomanly? His arrows had no draggled feathers low, and in his hand he bore a mighty bow. A cropped head had he, and a sun-browned face. Of woodcraft knew he all the useful ways. Upon his arm he bore a bracer gay, at one side a sword and buckler yea, and at the other side a dagger bright, well sheathed and sharp as spear-point in the light. On breast a Christopher of silver sheen. A Christopher is an image of Saint Christopher. He bore a horn in baldric, all of green. Baldric is a belt worn over one shoulder to support a sword or horn. A forester he truly was, I guess. Now we have the prioress. There was also a nun, a prioress, who in her smiling modest was and coy. Her greatest oath was but by Saint Eloi, and she was blown as Madame Eglantine. Full well she sang the services divine, intoning through her nose becomingly, and fair she spoke her French, and fluently after the school of Stratford at the Bow, for French of Paris was not hers to know. At table she had been well taught withal, and never from her lips let morsels fall, nor dipped her fingers deep in sauce, but ate with so much care the food upon her plate, that never driblet fell upon her breast. In courtesy she had delight and zest. Her upper lip was always wiped so clean, that in her cup was no iota seen of grease when she had drunk her draught of wine. Becomingly she reached for meat to dine, and certainly delighting in good sport, she was right pleasant, amiable, in short. She was at pains to counterfeit the look of courtliness and stately manners took, and would be held worthy of reverence. But to say something of her, moral sense, she was so charitable and piteous that she would weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, though it were dead or bled. She had some little dogs, too, that she fed on roasted flesh or milk and fine white bread, but sore she'd weep if one of them were dead, or if men smote it with a rod to smart, for pity ruled her and her tender heart. Right decorous her pleated wimple was, Her nose was fine, her eyes were blue as glass, her mouth was small and therewith soft and red, but certainly she had a fair forehead. It was almost a full span broad, I own, for truth to tell, she was not undergrown. Neat was her cloak, as I was well aware, of coral small, about her arm she'd bear a string of beads, and gauded all with green. And gauded means in a rosary the beads marking divisions are called gauds. Shoot, now I lost my spot. There we go, sorry. A string of beads and gauded all with green, and therefrom hung a brooch of golden sheen, whereon there was first written a crowned A, and under Armor Vincit Omnia, which means love conquers all. So now we have another little nun with her head she. That's all it says about the nun. 3 priests, who was her chaplain, and of priests she'd 3. So this must be the first nun. She has 3 priests, which the prioress, that was her name. So now we have the monk. A monk there was, one made for mastery, an outrider. An outrider is a monk privileged to ride abroad on the business of his order. An outrider who loved his venery, a manly man to be an abbot able. Full many a blooded horse had he in stable, and when he rode men might his bridle hear, a jingling in the whistling wind as clear, aye, as loud as does the chapel bell, where this brave monk was master of the cell. The rule of Maurus or Saint Benedict, by reason it was old and somewhat strict. This said monk let such old things slowly pace, and followed New World manners in their place. He cared not for that text, a clean-plucked hen, which holds that hunters are not holy men, nor that a monk, when he is cloisterless, is like unto a fish that's waterless. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. But this same text he held it not worth an oyster, and I said his opinion was right good. What? Should he study as a madman would upon a book and cloister cell, or yet go labor with his hands and swink and sweat? So swink is toil or slave. As Austin bids, and Austin refers to St. Augustine. How shall the world be served? Let Austin have his toil to him reserved. Therefore he was a rider day and night. Greyhounds he had as swift as bird in flight, since riding and the hunting of the hare were all his love, no cost would he spare. I saw his sleeves were purfled. Purfled means trimmed or decorated at the hand, with fur of gray, the finest in the land. Also to fasten hood beneath his chin, he had of good wrought gold a curious pin, a love knot in the larger end there was. His head was bald and shone like any glass, and smooth as one anointed was his face. Fat was this lord, he stood in goodly case. His bulging eyes he rolled about, and hot they gleamed and red like fire beneath a pot. His boots were soft, his horse of great estate. Now certainly he was a fine prelate. He was not pale, as some poor wasted ghost. A fat swan loved the best of any roast. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. And palfrey is a saddle horse other than a war horse. And that's the end of the monk. Now we have the friar. A friar there was, a wanton and a merry, a limiter, which is a friar licensed to beg within a certain district within the limits. A very festive man. In all the orders, for is none that can equal his gossip and his fair language. He had arranged full many a marriage of women young, and this at his own cost. Unto his order he was a noble post. Well liked by all, and intimate was he with franklins everywhere in his country, and with the worthy women of the town, for at confessing he'd more power in gown, as he himself said, than a good curate, for of his order he was licentiate. He heard confession greatly, it was said. He heard confession gently, it was said. Gently absolved too, leaving naught of dread. He was an easy man to give penance, when knowing he should gain a good pittance. For to a begging friar money given is sign that any man has been well shriven. For if one gave, he dared to boast of this, he took the man's repentance not amiss. For many a man there is so hard of heart, he cannot weep, however pains may smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, men should give silver to poor friars all bare. His tippet, which is a scarf, was stuck always full of knives and pins to give to young and pleasing wives, and certainly he kept a merry note. Well could he sing and play upon the rote. At balladry he bore the prize away. His throat was white as lily of the May. Yet strong he was as ever champion. In towns he knew the taverns, every one, and every good host in each barmaid too. Better than begging lepers, these he knew. For unto no such solid man as he accorded it as far as he could see. To have sick lepers for acquaintances, there is no honest advantageousness. In dealing with such poverty-stricken curs, it's with the rich and with the big victuallers, and so wherever profit might arise. Courteous was he, and humble in men's eyes. There was no other man so virtuous. He was the finest beggar of his house, a certain district being farmed to him. None of his brethren dared approach its rim. For though a widow had no shoes to show, so peasant was his in principio. In principio is in the beginning, which is the opening of the Gospel of St. John, which was credited with almost magical powers. He always got a farthing ere he went. He lived by pickings, it is evident, and he could romp as well as any whelp. On love days could he be mickle help. So love days means days appointed for the settling of disputes by arbitration, and mickle means great or much. So on love days he could be of mickle help. For there he was not like a cloisterer with threadbare cope. And cope is a long enveloping ecclesiastical garment. So with threadbare cope, as is the poor scholar, but he was like a lord or like a pope. Of double worsted was his semi-cope, that round like a bell, as you may guess. He lisped a little out of wantonness, to make his English soft upon his tongue. And in his harping, after he had sung, his 2 eyes twinkled in his head as bright as do the stars within the frosty night. This worthy limiter was named Hubert. Now we have the merchant. There was a merchant with forked beard and girt, in motley gown, and high on horse he sat, upon his head a Flemish beaver hat. His boots were fastened rather elegantly. He spoke his notions outright pompously, stressing the times when he had won, not lost. He would the sea, where held at any cost, across from Middlebow to Orwell town, at money changing he could make a crown. This worthy man wept all, his wits well set. There was no one could say he was in debt. So well he governed all his trade affairs, with bargains and with borrowings and with shares. Indeed he was a worthy man withal, but sooth to say, his name I can't recall. That was the merchant. Now we have the clerk. A clerk from Oxford was with us also, who turned to getting knowledge long ago. As meager was his horse as is a rake, nor he himself too fat, I'll undertake. But he looked hollow and went soberly. Right threadbare was his overcoat, for he had got him yet no churchly benefice, nor was a worldly as to gain office. For he would rather have at his bed's head some 20 books, all bound in black and red, of Aristotle and his philosophy than rich robes, fiddle, or gay psaltery. Yet and for all he was philosopher, but he had but little gold within his coffer. But all that he might borrow from a friend on books and learning he would swiftly spend, and then he'd pray right busily for the souls of those who gave him wherewithal for schools. Of study took he utmost care and heed, not one word spoke he more than was his need, and that was said in fullest reverence, and short and quick and full of high good sense. Pregnant of moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. Now we have the lawyer. A sergeant of the law, wary and wise, who'd often gone to Paul's Walk to advise. There was also compact of excellence, discreet he was, and of great reverence, at least he seemed so. His words were so wise, he often sat as justice in assize, by patent or commission from the crown, because of learning and his high renown. He took large fees, and many robes could own. So great a purchaser was never known. So purchaser was one who acquires lands by means other than descent or inheritance. So he actually bought land. So the lawyer continues, all was fee simple to him in effect, wherefore his claims could never be suspect. Nowhere a man so busy of his class, and yet he seemed much busier than he was. All cases and all judgments could he cite, that from King William's time were apposite, and he could draw a contract so explicit, not any man could fault therefrom illicit. And every statute he'd verbatim quote. He rode but badly in a medley coat, belted in a silken sash with little bars, but of his dress no more particulars. The Franklin. There was a Franklin in his company. White was his beard, as is the white daisy, of sanguine temperament by every sign. He loved right well his morning sop in wine. Delightful living was the goal he'd won, for he was Epicurus's very son, that held opinion that a full delight was true felicity, perfect and right. A householder, and that a great was he. St. Julian, he was in his own country. His bread and ale were always right well done. A man with better cellars there was none. Baked meat was never wanting in his house, of fish and flesh, and that so plenteous, it seemed to snow therein both food and drink, of every dainty that a man could think. According to the season of the year, he changed his diet and his means of cheer. Full many a fattened partridge did he mew, and many a bream and pike in fish pond too. Woe to his cook, except the sauces were poignant and sharp, and ready all his gear. His table, waiting in his hall alway, stood ready covered through the livelong day. At county sessions was he lord and sire, and often acted as a knight of shire. A dagger and a trinket bag of silk hung from his girdle, white as morning milk. He had been sheriff and been auditor, and nowhere was a worthier vavasor, which means a sub-vassal, next in rank below a baron. Now we have the haberdasher and the carpenter, and that's all it says about them. Then we have the weaver, the dyer, and the arras maker. An arras maker, dyer, and weaver were with us, clothed in similar livery, all of one sober, great fraternity. Their gear was new, and well adorned it was. Their weapons were not cheaply trimmed with brass, but all with silver, chastely made and well. Their girdles and their pouches too, I tell. Each man of them appeared a proper burgess, to sit in Guildhall on a high dais. And each of them, for wisdom he could span, was fitted to have been an alderman. For chattels they'd enough and two of rent, to which their goodwives gave a free assent. Or else for certain they had been to blame. It's good to hear madam before one's name. and go to church when all the world may see, having one's mantle borne right royally. All right, so then we have the cook. A cook they had with them, just for the nonce, to boil the chickens with the marrow bones and flavor tartly, and with galingale, which is a kind of sedge with an aromatic root, and flavor tartly, and with galingale. Well could he tell a draught of London ale, he could roast and seethe and boil and fry, and make a good thick soup and bake a pie. But very ill it was, it seemed to me, that on his chin a deadly sore had he. For sweet blanc mange, which blanc mange is not akin to the modern dish, but a compound of minced capon with cream, sugar, and flour. He made it with the best. All right, then we have the sailor. There was a sailor living far out west. For aught I know, he was of Dartmouth town. He sadly rode a hackney in a gown of thick rough cloth falling to the knee. A dagger hanging on a cord had he about his neck and under arm and down. The summer's heat had burned his visage brown, and certainly he was a good fellow. Full many a draught of wine he'd drawn, I trow, of Bordeaux vintage, while the trader slept. And by trader, that means that is his passenger. Nice conscience was a thing he never kept. If that he fought and got the upper hand, by water he sent them home to every land. But as for craft, to reckon well his tides, his current and the dangerous water sides, his harbors and his moon, his pilotage, there was none such from Hull to far Carthage. Hardy and wise in all things undertaken, by many a tempest had his beard been shaken. He knew well all the heavens as they were, from Gotland to the Cape of Finisterre, and every creek in Brittany and Spain. His vessel had been christened Madeleine. Now the physician. With us there was a doctor of physic. In all this world was none like him to pick for talk of medicine and surgery, for he was grounded in astronomy. He often kept a patient from the pall by horoscopes and magic natural. Well could he tell the fortune ascendant within the houses for his sick patient. He knew the cause of every malady, were it of hot or cold, of moist or dry, and were engendered, and of what humor. He was a very good practitioner. The cause being known, down to the deepest root, anon he gave to the sick man his boot. Ready he was with his apothecaries to send him drugs and all electuaries. By mutual aid much gold they'd always won. Their friendship was a thing not new begun. Well read was he in Aesculapius, and Discorides, and in Rufus, Hippocrates, and Holly and Galen, Serapion, Rhazes, and Avicen, of Heroes, Gilbert, and Constantine, Bernard and Gaddesden, and John de Massine. In diet he was measured, as could be, including naught of superfluity, but nourishing and easy, it's no libel, to say he read but little in the Bible. In blue and scarlet he went clad withal, lined with a taffeta and with sandal, and yet he was right and chary of expense. He kept the gold he gained from pestilence, for gold in physique is a fine cordial, and therefore loved the gold exceeding all. So when I said boot, where he would give them his boot, it would be his remedy or his relief. And Chaucer means the science we would now call astrology, for he was grounded in astronomy. So, all right, we're going to do one more and I think call it good for this recording. So we have the wife of Bath. There was a housewife come with Bath or near, who, said say, was deaf in either ear. At making cloth she had so great a bent, she bettered those of Ypres and even of Ghent. In all the parish there was no good wife should offering make before her on my life, and if one did indeed, so wroth was she, it put her out of all her charity. Her kerchiefs were of finest weave and ground, I dare swear that they weighed a full 10 pound, which of a Sunday she wore on her head. Her hose were of the choicest scarlet red, close gartered, and her shoes were soft and new. Bold was her face, and fair and red of hue. She'd been respectable throughout her life, with 5 churched husbands, bringing joy and strife, not counting other company in youth, but thereof there's no need to speak in truth. 3 times she'd journeyed to Jerusalem, and many a foreign stream she'd had to stem. At Rome she'd been, and she'd been in Boulogne, in Spain at Santiago, and at Cologne. She could tell much of wandering by the way. Gat-toothed was she, it is no lie to say. Upon an ambler easily she sat, well-wimpled eye, and over all a hat, as broad as is a buckler or a targe, and a targe is small shields. A rug was tucked around her buttocks large, and on her feet a pair of sharpened spurs. In company well could she laugh her slurs. The remedies of love she knew, perchance, for of that art she'd learned the old dance. And we will stop there.